Daniel Morgan stood in the doorway of his third-floor walk-up in Old Millbrook, holding the holographic invitation that had materialized above his kitchen table 3 days ago. The image rotated slowly, projecting Miranda's estate in full three-dimensional glory, all chrome spires and suspended glass platforms, the kind of architecture that screamed new money so loudly it could be heard from orbit. His cat, Cervantes, a scraggly orange tabby with one bent ear, wound between his ankles and meowed with what Daniel interpreted as skepticism. "I know," Daniel said, setting down his coffee mug, ceramic, chipped, bought at a yard sale in 2048. "But it's Dad's 75th. I have to go." The invitation chimed, sensing his attention. Miranda's voice, processed through enough audio filters to sand away any genuine warmth, filled the small kitchen. "Danny, darling, please try to look presentable. I'm having the ceremony live-streamed to my network. You know how important optics are. Maybe rent a decent holosuit? I can send you a link to my stylist's catalog." Daniel dismissed the message with a flick of his wrist, and the projection collapsed into a point of light before winking out. His apartment was a relic: actual books on actual shelves, a kitchenette with manual controls, furniture that served function over form. In a world where most people's living spaces responded to thought commands and rearranged themselves based on mood algorithms, Daniel's home was stubbornly, defiantly analog. He liked it that way. It was real. His phone, an older model, flat-screened, no neural interface, buzzed against the countertop. A text message, not a holo call. From Sophia, 2 more days. I'm finishing my lecture on Sartre and authenticity. The irony of teaching it before meeting your family is not lost on me. Daniel smiled, his fingers moving over the keyboard, typing rather than speaking. They'll love you. Or hate you. Possibly both simultaneously. Schrodinger's girlfriend, something like that. You told them I'm coming? I mentioned I was bringing someone. 3 dots appeared, pulsing. Then, but not who. I want them to meet you without expectations. Without running your social profile or checking your citation index or calculating your net influence score. So basically you want them to meet me like a person. Revolutionary, I know. This is why I love you. You're either the sanest man alive or completely insane. I haven't decided which. Daniel set the phone down, that word, love, still resonating in his chest like a tuning fork. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months, ever since she'd walked into the Millbrook Library asking for help with research on post-war existentialism. She'd been visiting family nearby, taking a break from Columbia's relentless academic machinery. He'd recommended Camus, then Kierkegaard. Then they'd talked for 3 hours while the afternoon light slanted through the library's tall windows. 2 weeks later she'd come back. And kept coming back. She still didn't know about the money. The real money. Daniel walked to his bedroom, barely large enough for the bed and a single dresser, and opened the bottom drawer. Beneath folded sweaters that had seen better decades, his fingers found the tablet. Government grade, unhackable, the kind of device that stored information in quantum encrypted layers. He pressed his thumb to the sensor and the screen bloomed to life. Bank accounts. Investment portfolios. Royalty statements. The numbers were absurd, had been absurd for 22 years now. Ever since the Meridian Protocol had gone from moderately successful novel to global franchise phenomenon. 4 films. A streaming series that ran for 6 seasons. Merchandise, foreign rights, theme park attractions. Video games. The money had piled up like snow in a blizzard, and Daniel had quietly, carefully, redirected most of it away from himself. He scrolled through recent transactions. Another scholarship funded, this one for a kid from the South Side whose aptitude scores were off the charts but whose family credit rating was subterranean. A grant to the library's literacy program. The quarterly payment to the trust that supported Akojua and her school in Ghana. The renovation costs for the Reynolds building. which he'd bought in cash 6 months ago and converted into rent-free studio space for artists, 63 students through college so far. Hundreds of families helped. Millions given away, carefully, anonymously, through layers of legal structures designed to hide his involvement, and his family still thought he lived on $42,000 a year. Daniel closed the tablet and buried it again. Cervantes had followed him into the bedroom and now sat on the windowsill, watching the street below where an autonomous delivery drone hummed past, its running lights painting brief streaks of color against the twilight. "What do you think?" Daniel asked the cat. "Am I being vindictive or just curious?" Cervantes yawned, showing impressive fangs for such a small creature. "That's what I thought." The apartment's intercom buzzed, actual physical buzzer, not a hollow ping. Daniel walked to the wall unit and pressed the talk button. "Yeah, delivery for Morgan. Signature required, come on up." A minute later, Daniel opened his door to find a courier holding a package roughly the size of a shoebox. The young man, maybe 20, with the telltale silver contacts that marked him as fully interface augmented, held out a scanner. Daniel pressed his thumb to it, declining the option to tip through his neural account because he didn't have one. "Cash okay?" Daniel asked, pulling out his wallet. The courier blinked, confused, as if Daniel had asked if he accepted payment in seashells. Sure." Daniel handed him a 20. Real paper currency, increasingly rare but still legal. The courier pocketed it quickly, mumbled thanks, and left. Inside the package, wrapped in tissue paper that probably cost more than his monthly utilities, was a suit. Tailored, perfectly sized, the fabric some kind of smart material that would adjust to temperature and lighting conditions. A note was pinned to the lapel in Miranda's handwriting, actual handwriting, because she'd taken calligraphy classes and liked to remind people she had hobbies beyond managing her influencer empire. "Danny, I know you'll show up in something dreadful, so here's a little gift. It's last season but it should fit. Try not to embarrass us. Love, M." Daniel held up the jacket. It probably cost 5,000 credits, maybe more. The material shifted color subtly in the light, navy to charcoal to midnight blue. It was beautiful. It was also completely not him. He hung it in his closet next to his actual suit, a simple gray number he'd bought used 7 years ago and had tailored to fit properly. That's what he'd wear. Miranda would hate it. Kyle would make jokes. Grace would purse her lips in that way that meant she was mentally cataloging his failures. He was used to it. His phone buzzed again. "Sophia. Just booked my train. Arriving Friday evening. Should I prepare for battle? Bring comfortable shoes. The estate is enormous and Miranda's idea of a gathering involves a lot of strategic wandering. I meant emotionally, then definitely yes, can't wait to meet them. And by can't wait, I mean I'm mildly terrified, they'll be on their best behavior. Probably, you're a terrible liar. That's one of your better qualities." Daniel smiled at the screen. See you Friday. Love you." There it was again. He typed back, "Love you too." After he hit send, he sat on his worn couch, spring-broken, comfortable, bought from a family down the street who'd upgraded to one of those adaptive phone things that molded to your body and tracked your health metrics. The TV across from him was newer than most of his possessions, but only because his old one had finally died. He turned it on, scrolling through feeds. The news was the usual mix of corporate expansion announcements, celebrity social score updates, and political theater. Somewhere in the scroll, he passed a story about rising inequality, about the growing divide between the interface-augmented elite and those who remain stubbornly analog. Daniel didn't need augmentation. His mind was sharp enough, his memory good enough. Besides, he'd read the studies about long-term neural interface use. The data wasn't reassuring. He switched to a streaming service and pulled up an old movie. Something from the 2020s before everything became interactive and personalized. There was something comforting about media that existed the same way for everyone, that didn't shift and change based on your viewing history and emotional state. Cervantes jumped onto his lap, circled 3 times, and settled into a purring loaf. Daniel stroked the cat's head absently, his mind already in the Hamptons, already navigating the minefield of his family's expectations. The drive up Friday afternoon was exactly as Daniel expected, his Honda Civic, vintage 2045, rattling along the interstate while newer vehicles whispered past on near-silent electric motors. The car was older than most people's first augmentation surgery. It had manual steering. Actual physical controls. Kyle had once asked him if he'd bought it ironically, as some kind of performance art statement about resisting progress. No, Daniel had said. I bought it because it was affordable and reliable. Kyle had laughed like that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The Hamptons estate rose from the landscape like something that had fallen from orbit and decided to stay. Miranda's house, calling it a house felt insufficient, like calling the ocean damp, sprawled across 15 acres of engineered coastline. The architecture was aggressively modern, suspended platforms connected by transparent walkways, photovoltaic glass that generated power while providing panoramic views, gardens maintained by autonomous drones that hummed through the air like mechanical bees. Daniel pulled into the circular drive, parking between a Tesla Model Z, the kind with the vertical takeoff option, and a Bentley that probably cost more than most people earned in 5 years. A valet approached, young and uncomfortable, clearly uncertain whether Daniel's car belonged to family or staff. I'm Daniel Morgan, he said, climbing out. Here for the party. The valet's expression shifted to something between surprise and pity. Of course, sir. Welcome. Daniel grabbed his overnight bag, canvas, old, held together with optimism and duct tape, and headed toward the main entrance. The door opened before he reached it, responding to facial recognition software embedded in the frame. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of glass and steel, 3 stories high, with a floating staircase that seemed to defy gravity through a combination of engineering and sheer arrogance. Danny, Miranda descended the stairs, arms spread wide, her smile so perfect it had to be performance. She wore something that cost more than his car, her hair arranged in a style that probably required an engineering degree to maintain. The subtle glow around her skin meant she'd had recent augmentation work done, probably the latest collagen neural sync treatment that Kyle's girlfriend had been raving about on her social feeds. She air-kissed both his cheeks, her perfume expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. You made it. And you drove yourself, how authentic. Good to see you too, Miranda. That's your bag? She glanced at his canvas duffel with barely concealed horror. I have smart luggage from the new Vuitton collection that you could borrow if, this is fine, of course. Her smile never wavered. Well, come in, come in. Everyone's out on the terrace. Brandon's showing off his new holo projection system. It's very impressive. Cost more than most people's houses. She laughed, high and bright and utterly artificial. Daniel followed her through rooms that looked like they'd been designed by an algorithm that had learned about luxury from a database but had never experienced actual comfort. Everything was pristine, curated, perfectly arranged. There were no dog-eared books on coffee tables, no jackets slung over chairs, no evidence that humans actually lived here. The terrace overlooked the Atlantic, waves rolling in with mathematical precision. 30 or 40 people mingled, holding drinks that changed color based on temperature, wearing clothes that adjusted their opacity and cut in response to their wearers' moods. It was a masterclass in conspicuous consumption. Kyle spotted him first. Little brother. You made it. He crossed the terrace in long strides, clapping Daniel on the back hard enough to sting. He was broader than Daniel, maintained through expensive personal training and probably some muscle augmentation. His girlfriend, Daniel didn't catch her name, they changed frequently, clung to his arm, her dress held together by what appeared to be strategic lighting and prayer. Still stamping books for a living? Kyle asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. He turned to his girlfriend. Daniel here is our family intellectual. Never cared about money or success. Very noble, the girlfriend giggled on cue. Someone has to maintain the town library, Daniel said evenly. Right, right. Important work. Kyle's grin was all teeth. What's that pay these days? 40? 50,000, 42. But the benefits are good, more laughter from the gathered circle. Daniel took it without flinching. He'd learned years ago that the best response to his family's needling was none at all. Let them have their fun. Let them feel superior. It didn't cost him anything. Grace appeared, her teenage son Ethan trailing behind her. She looked exhausted despite the expensive grooming, the kind of tired that no amount of rejuvenation therapy could fix. Her Chanel suit was severe, all sharp angles and hard edges. Daniel. She offered a stiff hug, her cheek barely brushing his. You look well, thanks. You too, Ethan, meanwhile, had lit up like someone had flipped a switch. Uncle Dan. Did you bring the graphic novels you promised, Ethan? Grace's voice was sharp. Your uncle just arrived. Don't monopolize him. She put a hand on her son's shoulder, steering him away. Go network with Miranda's business partner's children. That's why we're here. Ethan's expression collapsed, but he nodded and slouched toward a group of teenagers who were all staring at their neural interface contact lenses, seeing things invisible to everyone else. Daniel caught Ethan's eye and winked. The boy managed a small smile before disappearing into the crowd. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, the kind that bubbled with luminescent microparticles for effect. Daniel waved him off and headed for the bar, where he asked for a beer. The bartender looked momentarily confused, as if he'd requested something from the Paleolithic era, but eventually produced a bottle. Daniel. He turned to find his father standing there, smaller than he remembered. Freilier. Richard Morgan had built the family fortune through a combination of ruthless business acumen and perfect timing, catching the wave of neural interface technology in its early days and riding it to billions. But 75 years had caught up with him. The sharpness in his eyes remained, though, that calculating intelligence that missed nothing. Dad, you came, you invited me, I invite you every year. You don't always come. Richard studied him over his own drink, scotch, neat, probably older than most of the guests. Brought someone, she's arriving tomorrow. Wanted to miss the initial chaos, smart woman, very, Professor, Miranda tells me, philosophy. Columbia, Richard's eyebrows rose fractionally. And how did you meet, library? She needed research help, of course. There was something in his father's expression Daniel couldn't quite read. We should talk. Before the announcement, about, later. In private. Richard glanced around the terrace, at the performing wealth and calculated socializing. This spectacle needs to finish first. He walked away, leaving Daniel with more questions than answers. The afternoon crawled forward in a series of carefully orchestrated humiliations. Brandon, Miranda's hedge fund manager husband, cornered him near the infinity pool to ask about his salary with barely disguised condescension. Jessica, Kyle's bitter ex-wife, made jokes about Daniel never having to worry about divorce settlements since no one would marry him. Other relatives, cousins, in-laws, family friends, circulated past with varying degrees of pity or amusement. Still in that little craftsman house? Must be nice not having any real responsibilities. Do people still read physical books? Daniel absorbed it all, his face neutral, occasionally making a self-deprecating joke that landed better than anyone expected. The catering staff, at least, seemed to like him. He was the only family member who'd learned their names, who said please and thank you, who treated them like humans instead of furniture. Between conversations, he checked his phone. Messages from Sophia, train photos, observations about the countryside, a picture of her reading Camus with the caption, "Preparing for battle with the existentialists." He texted back, "The absurdity is the point, that's what I'm counting on." Ethan found him again later, when most of the adults were sufficiently buzzed and less watchful. The boy was tall for 16, all awkward angles and uncertain movement. He dropped into the chair beside Daniel's. "They're the worst, they're family, that's not mutually exclusive." Ethan pulled out his phone, one of the newer models with the full neural interface capability. He stared at it for a moment. Then put it away. "Uncle Dan, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why do you stay in Millbrook?" "With your..." "I mean, you could go anywhere, do anything." "Mom says you're wasting your potential." Daniel took a long drink of his beer. "What's your mom's definition of potential?" "Making money. Building influence. Increasing your social capital score." Ethan said it like reciting a catechism he'd been forced to memorize. "And what's yours?" The boy was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I just know this." He gestured at the party, "the wealth, the performance, isn't it? Everyone here is miserable. They just hide it better." "You're perceptive." "Mom hates that I want to be a teacher. Says it's beneath our family status." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "I asked if I could spend the summer with you. She said no. Said you couldn't provide appropriate supervision for someone with my advantages." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Your mom loves you. She's just obsessed with appearances?" Ethan finished. "Yeah. I know." He looked at Daniel directly. "You're the only real person in this family. Everyone else is performing all the time. Even when they think no one's watching." That's a heavy observation for 16, "I'm tired of being fake." Ethan stood up, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Thanks for actually talking to me like I'm a person." He walked away before Daniel could respond. Dinner was announced at 7, a formal affair in Miranda's dining room. The table could seat 40 but held only 20 tonight, immediate family and their partners, plus a few society friends whose presence was apparently necessary for proper documentation of the event. Daniel found himself seated between Jessica, who was working on her fourth martini, and one of Brandon's business associates who kept checking his neural feed and ignoring everyone physically present. Miranda stood at the head of the table, champagne flute raised. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the climate control system maintaining perfect temperature and humidity. "Before Daddy makes his big announcement," she began, her voice pitched for maximum social media resonance, "I want to toast our little brother Daniel. Danny, you've always marched to your own drum. Living simply, working with books, never caught up in the rat race like the rest of us." Polite laughter rippled through the room. "Some people measure success in money and influence. Others measure it in library cards issued." More laughter. "Both are valid. After all, someone has to help people find the bathroom using the Dewey Decimal System." Kyle joined in. "Remember when Danny told Dad he wanted to be a writer? Thank God that didn't work out, he'd be even broker than he already is." The table erupted in laughter. Daniel's smile didn't falter, but his grip on his water glass tightened fractionally. Grace, attempting to salvage something, added, "Daniel's happy. That's what matters. Even if he'll never afford a place like this, or put kids through private school, or..." She caught herself, realizing she was making it worse. "Anyway. To Daniel, to Daniel." The table echoed. Richard stood slowly, silencing the room with nothing but his presence. He looked older in the dining room's carefully calibrated lighting, more vulnerable. "I have an announcement about the family estate and the foundation's future direction. But first," the house's AI interrupted, its voice smooth and apologetic, "Mrs. Rothschild, there's someone at the main gate. She says she's with Mr. Daniel Morgan." All eyes turned to Daniel. He was already standing, his entire demeanor shifting, the quiet resignation falling away. replaced by something lighter, more genuine. That would be Sophia. I asked her to come early. He moved toward the foyer. I hope you don't mind, Miranda. I wanted her here for Dad's announcement. The family exchanged confused glances and followed him through the house. The front door opened on silent hinges to reveal Sofia Castellanos standing on the threshold. She was tall, elegant in a simple black dress that somehow made every designer outfit in the room look like costume jewelry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple twist. No jewelry beyond small silver earrings. No visible augmentation. Just confidence and intelligence and a warmth that immediately transformed the sterile space around her. Daniel's expression when he saw her was the most unguarded thing anyone in his family had seen from him in years. The kiss they shared was brief but charged with genuine intimacy, not performance, not calculation, just two people who actually liked each other. His hand found the small of her back with practiced ease. Everyone, this is Dr. Sofia Castellanos. Sophia, this is my family. Miranda recovered first, social programming kicking in. Doctor? How wonderful. What's your specialty? Philosophy. I teach at Columbia. Brief, impressed silence. Columbia carried weight even in this crowd. Kyle's suspicion was immediate. And how did you two meet? Sophia glanced at Daniel with a look that contained volumes. Biography section. Millbrook Library. I was researching existentialism in post-war literature. Daniel recommended Camus before I'd even finished explaining what I needed. The warmth in her voice made it clear this wasn't just a meet-cute story. This was origin myth, the moment everything changed. Brandon, ever the analyst, you came all the way from New York to use a small-town library? I was visiting family nearby. Lucky coincidence. The way she looked at Daniel suggested she didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Grace's attorney instincts activated. How long have you been seeing each other? 8 months, Sophia answered easily, her hand finding Daniel's. Miranda's enthusiasm was diamond hard. 8 months. And we're just hearing about her now? Danny, you're so secretive. I wanted to be sure, Daniel said, looking only at Sophia. And I wanted Sophia to meet you all without preconceptions. The subtext hung in the air like smoke, without you judging her based on what you think I can offer. Sophia smiled, reading the room in seconds. I brought wine. I hope that's appropriate. She held up the bottle she'd been carrying. And I'm apparently interrupting dinner. Should I apologize or embrace the dramatic entrance? Embrace it, Daniel said quietly. They love a spectacle. Morning light filtered through the photovoltaic glass of Miranda's terrace, turning the Atlantic Ocean into a sheet of hammered silver. The breakfast spread looked like it had been arranged by someone who'd learned about food from a design algorithm. Belgian waffles stacked in perfect geometric spirals. Fruit carved into architectural shapes, mimosas that shifted color based on ambient temperature. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, watching his family perform casual elegance like it was an Olympic sport. Sophia had integrated seamlessly, which shouldn't have surprised him but somehow did. She was discussing Heidegger with Richard, her Spanish flowing easily when she complimented the catering staff, her responses to Kyle's aggressive questions about academic politics sharp enough to draw blood without anyone noticing the wound. She wore simple linen, no jewelry beyond her grandmother's silver bracelet, and somehow made everyone else's designer breakfast look like they were trying too hard. Miranda watched Sophia with the expression of someone trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. You know, Sophia, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that sounded like compliment but landed like insult, Daniel's always been our creative soul. Never cared about the family business. Different values. She smiled brightly. It's actually quite admirable, in its way. Sophia set down her coffee, real coffee, not the synthetic blend most people drank, and met Miranda's eyes directly. I'm aware. It's one of the things I love about him. The word love hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel felt something warm unfurl in his chest, fighting against the familiar tightness that came with family gatherings. Kyle leaned back in his chair, the motion casual but his eyes calculating. Must be hard though, both of you on teacher salaries. Well, professor versus librarian, but still, he shrugged, the gesture saying everything his words didn't. We manage, Daniel interrupted gently, his hand finding Sophia's under the table. Her fingers squeezed his, steady and sure. Grace had been quiet through most of breakfast, her attention divided between her neural feed, visible through the slight movement of her eyes tracking invisible screens, and Ethan, who had claimed the seat next to Daniel and hadn't moved since. Now she looked up, her attorney face firmly in place. Ethan, don't monopolize your uncle. He has limited, she caught herself, recalibrating. Limited time before he has to get back to work. Richard set down his fork with more force than necessary. The sound cracked through the performance of casual conversation. He'd been watching his children all morning with an expression Daniel recognized from childhood, the look that preceded consequences. Chloe, Miranda's 19-year-old daughter, had been scrolling through her neural feed for the entire meal, her eyes distant with that particular glazed look of someone deep in their augmented reality overlay. Suddenly she sat up straight, her focus snapping back to physical reality with almost audible force. Oh my God. The table went quiet. Even the autonomous serving drones seemed to pause in their circuits. Uncle Daniel, is this you? Chloe turned her phone, old model, physical screen, probably kept as an affectation, so everyone could see. The video playing was from a local Millbrook news feed, the kind of community journalism that still existed in small pockets, resistant to corporate aggregation. The headline scrolled across the bottom, Mysterious Millbrook Philanthropist Revealed. Local librarian behind $4.2 million Reynolds Building purchase. The footage showed the Reynolds Building in its newly renovated glory, the historic brick cleaned and restored, new windows that somehow matched the original architecture while incorporating modern solar technology. A banner stretched across the facade, Community Arts Center, rent-free studios for local artists. At the bottom of the screen, in text that seemed to burn itself into Daniel's retinas, purchased by Daniel Morgan, whose anonymous donations have transformed our community. The silence that followed was the kind that had physical weight. Daniel could feel it pressing against his chest, could see it in the frozen expressions around the table. Sophia's hand tightened on his, her thumb tracing small circles against his palm, grounding him, reminding him he wasn't alone. Kyle recovered first, his laugh too loud, too forced. That's gotta be a different Daniel Morgan. Our Danny doesn't have $4.2 million. He looked around the table for confirmation, for someone to join in the joke. He doesn't have $42,000, Chloe kept scrolling, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. But look, there's a picture. That's definitely Uncle Dan. She held up the phone again. There he was, caught at a ribbon-cutting ceremony he'd tried desperately to avoid, his face partially obscured by someone's shoulder but unmistakably him. The mayor was shaking his hand. Local artists stood behind them, smiling. Miranda's voice rose an octave, that careful social polish cracking. Daniel. What is this? Every eye turned to him. Daniel felt the weight of their attention, their confusion rapidly calcifying into suspicion. He glanced at Sophia, who squeezed his hand once more before releasing it, a gesture that said I'm here and you've got this simultaneously. It's not a typo, he said quietly, Richard's voice cut through the rising chaos like a blade. No. It's not. The way he said it made everyone turn to face the patriarch. Richard sat very still, his hands folded on the table in front of him, and Daniel saw something in his father's expression he hadn't expected, pride. Grace's attorney training kicked in immediately, her voice sharp with betrayal. You knew? Danny and I have been talking for months. I know everything. Richard's voice carried steel that hadn't been there at dinner the night before. Unlike the rest of you, I actually talked to my son. I don't just lecture him about his failures, Brandon, Miranda's husband, leaned forward with that particular intensity hedge fund managers brought to potential investment opportunities. "Where did you get $4.2 million? Did you embezzle from the library?" He tried to make it sound like a joke. "It didn't land, Jesus, Brandon," Sophia muttered, her voice low enough that only Daniel and Richard heard clearly. Kyle stood, his chair scraping against the terrace's polished concrete. "Are you in trouble? Did you borrow from loan sharks? Because if you've embarrassed this family, sit down, Kyle." Daniel's voice wasn't loud, but something in it made his older brother actually pause. There was authority there, the kind that came from 22 years of quiet certainty while everyone around him performed success. "Sit down, Kyle." Saturday, Daniel stood slowly, pulling Sophia up with him. They presented a united front, and he felt her presence beside him like a physical shield. 22 years ago, I wrote a novel. The Meridian Protocol. It got published. It did okay, sold maybe 50,000 copies. Then Hollywood optioned it. Miranda's face was pure confusion. "You wrote a book? When?" "I was 25. You were busy with your first startup, the one that failed before the second one succeeded." Kyle was building his real estate portfolio. Grace was in law school. Daniel's voice stayed level, factual. "No one asked what I was doing, so I didn't tell you." Grace's attorney brain was already calculating. "What does a book option pay?" "Like $50,000, the option was $250,000. The screenplay sale was $2 million. Then they made it into a movie." Around the table, phones appeared in hands. Neural interface users suddenly needed physical screens to verify what they were hearing. Fingers swiped, eyes widened. The soft sounds of searches being executed filled the silence. Kyle stared at his screen, his voice strangled. "The Meridian Protocol is your book? That made 4 movies? That has a streaming series, and merchandise. And foreign rights. And video games. And theme park integration." Daniel's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "It's still generating royalties." Chloe's voice came out almost reverent. "Oh my God. The Meridian Protocol is like a huge franchise. My friends are obsessed. There's a new VR experience launching next month." She stopped, realization hitting. "You're that Daniel Morgan?" Miranda was scrolling frantically, her carefully maintained composure crumbling with each swipe. "The box office on these films, the streaming numbers." Her face had gone white beneath her expensive dermatreatment glow. "How much money are we talking about?" Richard stood slowly, supporting himself on the table with both hands. He looked every one of his 75 years, but there was something like vindication in his expression. "Tell them, son. Tell them everything." Daniel took a breath. Sophia's hand found his again, her fingers lacing through his with practiced ease. She was his anchor, the one real thing in a room full of performance and calculation. Between the book deals, film rights, streaming, merchandise, and investments, I have approximately $40 million. The chaos that erupted was almost beautiful in its totality. Miranda actually dropped her mimosa, the glass shattering against the concrete, the color-shifting liquid spreading in a puddle that cycled through purple to blue to gold. Kyle looked like someone had physically struck him, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Grace just stared, her attorney brain visibly trying to process information that refused to compute. Brandon was already furling through screens, calculating, analyzing, looking for an angle. Jessica, Kyle's ex-wife, who'd been nursing a hangover in sullen silence, started laughing, high and slightly hysterical. "You've been sitting on $40 million while you let them mock you." For years, the laughter had an edge of genuine admiration. Grace found her voice first, and there was real hurt in it that cut deeper than the earlier suspicion. "Why? Why would you hide this from us?" This was the moment. Daniel felt it crystallizing around him, The point where everything changed or nothing did, where he could retreat back into comfortable anonymity or step fully into the truth he'd been carrying for 2 decades. Sophia's presence beside him, solid and real, made the choice easier. Because I wanted to see what would happen if you thought I had nothing. The silence was absolute. Even the ocean seemed to quiet, waves pausing mid-crash. If I couldn't invest in your ventures, Kyle. If I couldn't introduce you to important people, Miranda. If I couldn't help fund your political campaign, Grace. Yes, I heard you're planning one. I heard everything you say about me when you think I can't hear. His voice stayed gentle, which somehow made the words land harder. If I was just your brother. The one who never left our hometown. The one who chose books over bonds. I wanted to know if you'd love me anyway. Miranda's tears had started, mascara, expensive, supposedly waterproof, creating dark tracks down her face. That's not fair, isn't it? Daniel pulled out his phone, old model, physical screen, deliberately antiquated, and started swiping through screens. When's the last time you called me and didn't mention my simple life or limited means? When's the last time you invited me to something without apologizing for me in advance to your friends? He turned the phone so they could all see. I have the messages, Miranda. I kept them all. Kyle's face had gone red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. So this is what, some kind of test? Some intellectual experiment, not a test. An answer. Daniel swiped to another screen, his movements deliberate. The Reynolds building? I converted it into rent-free artist studios and a community center in Mom's memory. She always said our town needed more spaces for creativity. That it was dying because everything was about profit and nothing was about people. Another swipe. Those library conferences I attend? I've been funding scholarships. 63 students through college so far. Full rides. Including your housekeeper's daughter. Grace. Maria. She's a doctor now. ER resident in Chicago, specializing in underserved communities. Grace's face crumpled, her careful attorney composure shattering. Maria? I didn't know you never asked about her. Daniel's voice didn't rise, didn't harden, but the words cut clean. I met her when she was 7, playing in your backyard while her mother cleaned your house. Smart kid. Loved books. No college fund. Full ride now, courtesy of the Morgan Educational Trust that I established 15 years ago. He swiped again. Those disappearances everyone jokes about? I've been visiting my goddaughter in Ghana. Akojua. She's 15. Orphaned at 7. I've been supporting her. Her school, her village's water infrastructure project. We FaceTime every Sunday. The photo he showed them was Daniel surrounded by smiling children in a dusty village square, clearly beloved, clearly home in a way he never looked at family gatherings. She calls me Papa Dan. She's the closest thing I have to a daughter, and none of you knew she existed because none of you ever asked what I do with my time beyond stamping books. Brandon, recovering his hedge fund composure, tried to regain control of the narrative. This is all very moving, but why bring it up now? What's the angle? He looked between Daniel and Richard, calculating. Are you trying to renegotiate your inheritance share? Sophia had been quiet through the entire revelation, but now her voice cut through like ice through fog. Excuse me? Brandon turned to her with that particular smile men like him used when explaining obvious things to people they considered less informed. You're clearly a smart woman, Dr. Castellanos. Dating a seemingly poor librarian for 8 months, then suddenly he's worth $40 million right when the family patriarch is discussing his estate? You have to admit, the timing is convenient? Sophia stood, and Daniel watched his family realize they'd miscalculated badly. She was magnificent in her controlled fury, every word precisely chosen, every gesture economical and devastating. I've read your company's SEC filings, Mr. Rothschild. Your last 3 funds have underperformed the market by 12%. You married Miranda 2 months after her second divorce, right when her first company went public. And you're questioning my timing? Brandon's mouth opened. Nothing came out, Sophia continued, addressing the whole table now. I met Daniel 8 months ago in the biography section of his library. He helped me find resources for my book on existentialism and authenticity. We talked for 3 hours about Camus and Kierkegaard. About what it means to live genuinely in a world that commodifies everything, including identity. Her voice softened, looking at Daniel. He recommended books. I came back the next week. And the next, we went on our first date to a diner that serves breakfast all day. He paid with a coupon. I thought it was charming, a man secure enough not to perform wealth, not to use money as a way of establishing dominance or worth. She turned back to the family. We spent 2 months just talking before anything physical happened. He met my mother, who has dementia. Who sometimes thinks he's my father, or her brother, or a stranger. He sat with her for hours. Reading poetry in Spanish even though he had to use a translation app to get the pronunciation right, even though she didn't always know who he was, the steel returned to her voice. I fell in love with a librarian who cries at the end of children's books and calls his goddaughter every Sunday. A man who knows the names of every person who works in his building, who tips in cash because service workers can't always access digital payments. A man whose content, I found out about the money exactly 4 weeks ago when I finally asked why he had a framed movie poster for the Meridian Protocol in his garage. He looked mortified and admitted he wrote it. I googled it. Had a minor panic attack. We talked for 6 hours about what it meant, about what changes and what doesn't. She took Daniel's hand, her grip fierce. And you know what changed between us? Nothing. Except now I understand why he flinched when I suggested we splurge on a nicer dinner. Why he still shops at thrift stores. Why he's so careful with trust. Miranda's voice came out broken, mascara stained. Sophia, we're not monsters, aren't you? Sophia's question was soft, which made it worse. I've been here 24 hours. I've heard you apologize for him 6 times. Mock his career 4 times. Question his worth as a human being more times than I can count. And he took it. With grace. With humor. Never defending himself. Never attacking back. That's not strength you're seeing. That's exhaustion. He's been conducting this experiment for over 2 decades, and you've all failed spectacularly. Ethan suddenly stood, tears streaming down his face, his 16-year-old composure completely shattered. I asked Uncle Dan if I could spend the summer with him. He looked at Grace, and Daniel could see the boy's heart breaking in real time. You know what he said? He said I could come anytime, that his house was always open, but that I needed to ask you because you're my mom and he'd never undermine your authority. I googled him after that. Found out about the scholarships. The community center. Everything. And you know what? It made sense. Ethan's voice cracked. Uncle Dan is the only one who treats people like people. He's the only one in this family who asked me what I want to do with my life instead of telling me what I should want. The only one who doesn't care that I want to be a teacher instead of a lawyer or a CEO or whatever you've decided I should be. He turned to face the whole table. He's the only real thing in this whole fake family. Daniel moved immediately to his nephew, hands gentle on the boy's shoulders. Hey. We don't have to decide anything now. Let's all take a breath. No. Ethan's voice was fierce through the tears. They need to hear this. You're the only one who's not a hypocrite. You're the only one who's actually happy. Richard stood again, stronger this time, and the chaos quieted like someone had turned down the volume on reality. I called this gathering to announce my estate plans. I was going to split everything 4 ways, equal shares, the way your mother would have wanted. He paused, looking at each of his children in turn. But after this morning, after watching how you treat your brother, I'm making changes. Kyle started to speak. Dad, if this is about quiet. Richard's CEO voice, the one that had built empires and crushed competitors. Instant obedience. I built this family's wealth through hard work and smart decisions. I thought I was building a legacy. Instead, I built a dynasty of people who measure everything in dollars and social scores and influence metrics. He looked at Daniel, and his expression softened. Except one. One of you understood that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. One of you asked me 6 months ago how to structure trusts to outlive me, to keep funding scholarships after I'm gone. One of you wanted advice on impact investing, not on buying a bigger house or a faster car or more followers. I'm revising my will. The split is no longer even. Daniel will receive controlling interest in the family foundation and the primary trustee position. The rest of you will get your shares, but with stipulations about charitable giving and community involvement. Real involvement, not tax shelters disguised as philanthropy. Miranda's panic was immediate and visceral. Daddy, that's not fair. We didn't know, you didn't ask. Richard's voice cracked, 20 years of disappointment finally breaking through. When's the last time any of you called me to ask how I was, not what connections I could make for you? Danny calls every Wednesday. We talk about books, politics, life. Real things. He asked about my health, my happiness. He knows about my grief counseling after your mother died because he asked. Because he cared enough to ask. The old man's eyes filled with tears. You've been cruel to your brother for 20 years. Mocking him. Pitying him, treating him like he's less than because he chose meaning over money. And he let you, because he wanted to see if blood was thicker than greed. Richard's voice dropped to almost a whisper. It isn't. And that breaks my heart. The guest cottage was silent except for the distant crash of waves and Daniel's own breathing. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The adrenaline that had carried him through the revelation had burned off, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that made his bones feel like lead. His hands were shaking slightly, aftershocks from confronting 2 decades of careful silence in the span of 20 minutes. Sophia knelt in front of him. Her hands finding his knees, warm and solid and real. Hey. Look at me. He lifted his head. His eyes felt gritty, red-rimmed. The carefully maintained composure he'd worn like armor for so long had finally cracked, and he wasn't sure how to put it back together. Wasn't sure he wanted to. Did I just destroy my family? Sophia's expression was fierce, no pity in it, just steady certainty. You told them the truth. If that destroys anything, it was already broken. She cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs tracing the hollows beneath his eyes. How do you feel? Daniel laughed, the sound coming out shaky and uneven. Lighter. Terrified. Sad. Relieved. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. All of it. Everything all at once. She kissed him softly, her lips tasting like the coffee she'd had at breakfast and something sweeter underneath. You were magnificent. Terrifying and magnificent. I almost threw up twice, I know. Sophia smiled against his mouth. You get this little twitch in your jaw when you're nervous. Right here. She traced the spot just below his ear, her touch feather light. It's adorable. Daniel pulled her up, needing her weight and warmth against him, needing something real and solid when everything else felt like it was disintegrating. Sophia came willingly, settling into his lap, her arms wrapping around his neck. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. For being here. For having my back when they, always. She cut him off with a kiss, deeper this time, her hands sliding into his hair. When she pulled back, Her eyes were dark with something that had nothing to do with the chaos of the morning. You know what else is adorable? Watching you quietly eviscerate your hedge fund brother-in-law with facts and figures. Very sexy, yeah? Daniel's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, feeling the heat of her through the thin fabric of her dress, devastatingly so. Sophia's fingers were working the buttons of his shirt, her voice dropping to that particular register that made his pulse spike. I have a thing for competence. And integrity. And men who cry at children's books. Their kissing intensified, became something urgent and necessary, both of them needing this physical connection after the emotional devastation of the morning. Sophia pulled back just enough to whisper against his lips, "Make love to me." Slowly. I want to feel everything. The afternoon light filtered through the cottage's sheer curtains, turning everything soft and golden. Sophia's sundress slid off her shoulders and pooled on the floor like spilled ink. Daniel's attention to her was worshipful, careful, as if reminding himself that this connection, this person, was real and his and wouldn't disappear when he blinked. Her gasps as he entered her. Moving with deliberate slowness, their eyes locked on each other, present in every moment and breath and heartbeat. I love you, he murmured against her lips, tasting salt, hers or his, he couldn't tell. I love you, she responded, and there were tears on both their faces, release and relief and joy and grief all tangled together in a knot that felt like it was finally loosening. They climaxed together, holding each other like lifelines, then collapsed in a tangle of limbs and sweat-slicked skin. Daniel's heart was still racing, his breathing uneven. Sophia traced lazy patterns on his chest, her fingers following the contours of muscle and bone like she was memorizing him. What happens now? She asked after a long silence. I have no idea. Sophia propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling over her shoulder in a dark curtain. Want to run away to Ghana? Meet Akosua in person? I've always wanted to see West Africa. Daniel laughed, genuine this time, the sound coming easier. You'd do that, with you? Anywhere. Her expression turned serious. Daniel, I need you to understand something. I didn't fall in love with your bank account this afternoon. I fell in love with the man who recommended Camus. Who makes terrible puns about the Dewey Decimal System. Who cries during Pixar movies. The money doesn't change how I see you. If anything, I'm even more impressed that you managed to stay yourself despite it. He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her, vanilla and coffee and something uniquely Sophia. Marry me, she blinked, her expression shifting from serious to startled. What? Not now. Not today. But someday. Daniel's heart was racing again, but it felt different this time, felt like possibility instead of panic. Marry me. Let me make you legally responsible for my terrible puns and my cat. Sophia was crying and laughing at the same time, her face transforming into something luminous. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Is it a yes? Obviously. She kissed him hard. But you're doing it properly later. With a ring and everything. On your knees. The whole a room designed to intimidate rather than invite, all floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes that had never been opened, strategic lighting that made everything look like a museum exhibit. Richard sat in one of the wingback chairs, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking older and frielier than he had at breakfast but somehow more solid, more present. Dad, son. Richard gestured to the chair beside him with his free hand. Hell of a day, I'm sorry if I don't. Richard's voice was firm, carrying echoes of the CEO he'd been before age and grief had softened him. Don't apologize for telling the truth. I should have done it years ago. Should have called them out every time they treated you like you were less than. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the house's climate control system and the ocean beyond the windows. Your mother would have been proud of you, Richard said finally, staring into his glass like it held answers. The scholarships. The community center. Akosua. All of it. That's what she always wanted our wealth to do, make the world bigger for people, not smaller. I miss her, Daniel admitted, the words coming easier in the dim light of the library. Me too. Richard's hand shook slightly as he raised his glass. She saw it, you know. Before she died. Saw what your siblings were becoming. She asked me to look after you, make sure you didn't lose yourself trying to fit in with them. You didn't have to worry about that, no. You were always your own person. Like her. Richard looked at his son, really looked at him, and Daniel saw recognition there, saw himself being seen. The foundation is yours. Do with it what she would have wanted. That's a lot of responsibility. You've been handling responsibility quietly for 20 years. Time to do it openly. Richard paused, took a sip of his scotch. Sophia's good for you. Don't let her get away, already proposed. Sort of. Richard's laugh was genuine, rusty with disuse but real. How does one sort of propose? Badly. She said yes anyway, smart woman. Daniel found Ethan on the beach as the sun was setting, turning the ocean into hammered copper. The boy was sitting in the sand, knees pulled to his chest, and even from a distance Daniel could see the tear tracks on his face, the defeated slump of his shoulders. 16 and already exhausted by the performance of being alive in his family. Mind some company? Ethan shrugged, but shifted to make room beside him. They sat quietly for a while, watching the waves roll in with mathematical precision, the sound constant and somehow soothing. I meant what I said, Ethan finally spoke, his voice raw. About the summer. About running away if I have to. You're not running away anywhere, Daniel said firmly, turning to face his nephew. Your mom loves you. She's just lost right now. But she's trying. Did you see her face when she left? That was someone realizing they need to change. She measures everything. Ethan's voice cracked. My grades. My extracurriculars. My social capital score. Even the friends I'm allowed to have. It's exhausting being her project instead of her son, I know. But you know what's harder than being raised that way? Unlearning it. Daniel picked up a handful of sand, let it run through his fingers. Your mom has been training herself to think like that for 25 years. Corporate law, high-stakes litigation, it teaches you to measure everything, commodify everything. It won't change overnight. Ethan picked up a rock. Threw it hard into the ocean. How did you stay yourself? With all of them telling you that you weren't enough, Daniel considered the question, wanting to give his nephew something real, something that would actually help. I found meaning outside their approval. The library. The writing. Akojua. The scholarships. Every person I helped reminded me that their definition of success wasn't the only one. That there were other ways to measure a life well lived. Is that why you didn't tell them? About the money, partly. Also because I was curious. And hurt. And maybe a little vindictive. Daniel smiled sadly. I'm not perfect, Ethan. I let them mock me for years because some part of me was keeping score. Waiting for this moment. That's not exactly healthy either, but you were right. They treated you like crap, they did. And now we all have to figure out what comes next. Daniel turned to face his nephew fully. Relationships aren't binary, they're not just good or destroyed. They're complicated. Your mom can be wrong about how she's parented and still love you desperately. My siblings can be shallow and still be family. Ethan absorbed this, his expression slowly shifting from angry to something more thoughtful. So you're not cutting them off? I don't know yet. But I'm not making that decision today, while everyone's raw and reactive. Daniel bumped Ethan's shoulder gently. As for the summer, we'll figure something out. Maybe you come for a few weeks. Maybe your mom comes too. Maybe we both teach her how to actually relax, how to exist without performing. that would be weird, everything's weird right now. Might as well lean into it. Grace found Daniel on the terrace well after dark, when most of the house lights had been extinguished and the only illumination came from the moon and the soft glow of pathway lights embedded in the concrete. Sophia had gone to bed, giving him space to process, to exist alone with his thoughts for the first time since the morning's revelation. "Can we talk?" Daniel gestured to the chair beside him, not trusting his voice yet. Grace sat, and she looked different in the darkness, smaller somehow, stripped of the armor of designer clothes and perfect posture. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt, her makeup cried off, her carefully styled hair falling loose around her face. She looked more human than Daniel had seen her look in years. "I've been calling people all evening," she started, her voice rough. "Maria. My old housekeeper, her mom. They told me everything you've done. Not just the money. You were at Maria's high school graduation. You helped her move into her dorm. You sent care packages during her exams, remembered her birthday every year." Daniel stayed quiet, watching the ocean, letting her speak. "I was her employer's daughter. I saw her grow up in my house, playing in my backyard while her mother cleaned my toilets and did my laundry." Grace's voice broke. "And I never even learned her favorite color. Never asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. Never saw her as a person with dreams and potential. What kind of person does that make me? A busy one. A distracted one. Not a monster, feels like a monster." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Ethan said he'd rather run away than stay with me. My 16-year-old son would literally prefer homelessness to spending the summer in my house. He's dramatic. He's 16. He wouldn't actually run away. But the fact that he wants to." Grace turned to look at her brother directly. "What do I do? How do I fix this? How do I fix us?" Daniel took a long breath, choosing his words carefully. "You start by listening. Not to respond, not to correct, but to actually hear him. Ask him what makes him happy. What scares him. What he dreams about when he's supposed to be studying for the SATs or networking with the right people. And then, and this is the hard part, you let him be those things, even if they don't match your plan. Even if they disappoint your expectations. He wants to be a teacher, he'd be a great teacher." "That's what I thought tonight." Grace laughed, bitter and self-aware. "For the first time in his entire life, I thought he'd be amazing at that instead of, but he could be so much more. When did I become someone who thinks teaching isn't enough? When you started measuring worth in salary instead of impact. When you internalized the same metrics that make you miserable and started applying them to everyone around you." They sat in silence for a long time, the waves providing a constant soundtrack. "Can I ask you something?" Grace finally said. "Why did you stay in Millbrook? With all that money, all those options, you could have gone anywhere. Done anything, because I liked it there. Because Mrs. Henderson still needs help finding large print mysteries and I know exactly which authors she prefers. Because the library's literacy program reaches kids who slip through every other crack in the system. Because not everything worth doing is impressive to other people." Grace absorbed this, turning it over like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "I want to understand that. I want to feel that kind of contentment, that kind of peace." She turned to face him fully. "I want to send Ethan to you this summer. Not as punishment for me, but because he needs to see that there's another way to be successful. He needs to see you living it, not just talking about it. And you? I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing. When I'm not networking or leveraging or strategizing every conversation." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "Would you hate it if I came to visit sometimes? Not to oversee Ethan. Just to learn how to be myself again. If there's still a self underneath all the performance." Daniel looked at his sister, really looked at her, and saw someone genuinely trying, someone taking the first stumbling steps toward authenticity. "I wouldn't hate that," thank you. She stood to leave, then turned back at the doorway. Daniel? I'm sorry. For all of it. For not seeing you. For not asking. For making you feel like you had to hide who you were to be loved by us. I'm sorry too. For setting up a test you didn't know you were taking. For keeping score instead of just being honest. We're both kind of messed up, huh, spectacularly. Daniel smiled, real and tired. But we can work on it. If you want to, I want to. After she left, Sophia appeared in the doorway wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. How'd it go? Better than expected. Worse than I hoped. Complicated in ways I'm still processing, so like all family relationships, exactly like that. Daniel opened his arms and she settled into his lap, both of them looking at the ocean under the stars, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. What are you thinking about? Sophia asked. Her head resting against his shoulder, that tomorrow I have to go back to the library. Mrs. Henderson is waiting for the new large print mystery order. Kevin needs help with his college essays, he's applying to engineering programs and he's terrified. The teen book club meets on Tuesday and they're doing Bradbury this month, your real life, my real life. He kissed her temple, breathing in her scent. Want to come with me? See where I actually spend my days, meet the people who make the work worth doing, I'd love that. Sophia's voice carried a smile. Though fair warning, after today, I might be slightly turned on by watching you use the Dewey Decimal System. Classify things for me. Daniel. Use your library science, Daniel laughed, the tension finally breaking completely, replaced by something lighter and warmer. That's a very specific kink, I'm a very specific person. She tilted her head up to kiss him. Take me home, Daniel. Your real home. I want to meet Mrs. Henderson and Kevin and whoever else makes your days meaningful. I want to see your cat judge me. I want to wake up in a house that's lived in instead of staged. It's a 900 square foot craftsman with creaky floors and a bathroom from 1952 that I've been meaning to renovate for 5 years. Perfect. 6 months later, the Millbrook Library looked exactly like Daniel had left it, and somehow that fact filled him with more contentment than anything else could have. The building was decorated for the holidays in a way that was warm rather than impressive. Paper snowflakes made by the children's literacy program hung in the windows, lights strung with more enthusiasm than precision, a real tree in the corner that shed needles and smelled like winter. Daniel sat at the reference desk helping Mrs. Henderson with genealogy research, his hands moving across the keyboard with practiced ease. She was tracing her family back to Ireland, convinced she was descended from minor nobility, and Daniel was helping her navigate databases without crushing her hopes. The door opened, bringing in a gust of December air and Sophia, now visibly pregnant, carrying 2 coffees in a recyclable carrier. She was followed by Ethan, who'd been living with Daniel for 3 months now, attending the local high school and thriving in ways that made Grace cry with relief during her weekend visits. The boy had gained weight, smiled more readily, volunteered at the library after school with genuine enthusiasm. Grace came in behind them carrying art supplies, having driven up from the city for her bi-weekly visit. She'd taken a sabbatical from her firm, was seeing a therapist twice a week, working on what she called her rehumanization project. She taught a free art class at the library every other weekend now, mostly to elderly residents who'd never thought they could create anything beautiful. Uncle Dan. Akojua rushed over, her energy filling the space like light. She was visiting from Ghana for winter break, staying in Daniel's guest room and adapting to New England winter with characteristic good humor. Mrs. Henderson says the computer is possessed by demons and refuses to cooperate with her spiritual energy. Daniel laughed. Be right there. The library hummed with activity, not Manhattan crowds but genuine community. Real people with real needs, real connections being formed over book recommendations and computer help and quiet conversations in the reading nooks. Richard entered, looking healthier than he had in years, moving with more energy despite his age. He'd moved to a small apartment in Millbrook 2 months after the confrontation, wanting proximity to Daniel and escape from the toxic dynamics that defined the rest of the family. He volunteered twice a week now, running a business mentorship program for local entrepreneurs, using his decades of experience to actually help people instead of just accumulating more wealth. "There's my favorite librarian," Richard called out, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "I'm your only librarian," Daniel responded automatically, the exchange now ritual. "Still my favorite." The scene was messy and real and imperfect, this modest library filled with actual life instead of curated performance. Daniel surrounded by people who saw him completely, who valued him for reasons that had nothing to do with net worth or social capital. Sophia watching him with obvious love and one hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Ethan reshelving books with careful attention to proper organization. Akojua helping a small child find a picture book about astronauts. Grace in the corner teaching watercolor techniques to a group of seniors who giggled like teenagers. Richard reading to a group of preschoolers, his former CEO voice now deployed for character voices in Dr. Seuss. This was success. Not the Hamptons estate or the social media perfect life. But this, messy and real and meaningful and true. That evening Daniel's small craftsman house was packed beyond comfortable capacity. Akojua was teaching everyone a Ghanaian card game that involved complex strategy and lots of shouting. Ethan was cooking dinner, something elaborate he'd learned from Sophia involving spices Daniel couldn't pronounce. Grace was actually laughing at one of her son's jokes instead of correcting his grammar or posture. Richard sat on the couch with Cervantes draped across his lap like a furry judgment, looking more peaceful than Daniel could remember seeing him. Sophia found Daniel in the kitchen, wrapped her arms around him from behind, her pregnant belly pressing against his back. Happy, he turned in her embrace. Kissed her thoroughly, his hands resting on her stomach where their daughter was growing. Terrifyingly so. Keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all elaborate wish fulfillment. This is real. We're real. All of this. She gestured toward the chaotic, lovely scene around them. This is what you built by refusing to compromise who you were, even when it would have been easier. We built. This is ours now. All of it. The doorbell rang. They exchanged a look. They weren't expecting anyone else. The guest list was complete. Daniel opened the door to find Miranda standing on his modest porch looking profoundly uncomfortable, like she'd been transported to an alien planet. She was dressed down, for her, in simple clothes with no visible designer labels, no augmented accessories broadcasting her status. She held a casserole dish like it might explode. "I know I'm not invited," she started, her voice shaking. "But I made Mom's lasagna. The recipe I swore I'd never make because it was too ordinary, too pedestrian. And I thought maybe if there's room at your table." She looked genuinely nervous. Genuinely humbled, her carefully constructed social armor completely absent. Daniel looked back at Sophia, who nodded slightly, her expression saying your call but you know what the right choice is. "There's always room," he said, opening the door wider. "But you have to tell Richard you made Mom's recipe. He's been trying to recreate it for years and failing miserably." Miranda's eyes filled with tears. "Okay." As she entered, passing from the cold December night into the warmth and noise and life of Daniel's small house, he felt something shift and settle. Not resolution exactly, that would take years, maybe decades, but possibility. The complicated mess of family beginning to untangle. One honest moment at a time, Sophia's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his with practiced ease. "Still terrified?" "Completely, good." She smiled, squeezed his hand. "That means it matters. That means it's real." The sound of laughter and conversation filled the small house, imperfect and real and finally true.